All right, good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming. I think we're just going to get started right now. First off, I want to let everybody know that we are recording this session so that people will be able to see it later, both so in case you guys have to skip out or you want to come back to something, the option will be there, but also we're recording, so if you say anything, it'll end up on the recording. So there's that. Also, again, thanks for joining us today. Tomorrow there's an in-person session that we'll be having in the morning in Barrie, which is going to basically be the same content. So you don't need to go to both unless you feel like it, but we'd be happy to have you if you do. If anybody has questions at any point, please, you can either unmute yourselves and just say them, or you can throw them in the chat, or we'll definitely have a section for questions at the end in case there are anything that I didn't get to. All right. Yes. So first off, the public library's annual report is what we're talking about. So every public library in the country is intended to fill out this. It's actually referred to by IMLS as the Public Library Survey, but Vermont has been calling it the annual report for a while, so I kind of stick with that. The report is created by IMLS in concert with all the state, what are called data coordinators. Every state has one person who's in charge of kind of dealing with the survey and the statistics and everything. And for Vermont, currently, that's me. So, but in any case, so that's where questions come from. But the whole report is kind of managed by IMLS, which is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, if you're not familiar with their long name. Yes, so there is actually another survey, Public Library Survey, which is put out by the Public Library Association, part of ALA, and that is voluntary, so only some libraries participate in that, and it has some similarities and some differences, but the one we're talking about is the annual report, Public Library Annual Report. So yeah, okay, so I'm going to move forward a little bit. Basically, the report is a statistical overview of much of everything that a public library has done over a year. It doesn't increasingly it doesn't cover everything, but it's a pretty solid snapshot of the things that are straightforward to capture with statistics. There's some things that are hard to get with statistics and they're not in there at this point, but there are other ways people are trying to track those. Most questions are determined by IMLS with input from us state data coordinators. In fact, the most recent change last year was and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the new question was how many website visits you had. And so there's this whole process to add questions to the survey. Additionally, each state gets to ask whatever questions they want to ask. We have probably 40% of the questions on the survey are ones that the state of Vermont asks specifically because we want to know about it. Yeah. So, okay, so that's basically the annual report in a nutshell. I should come back to this. So annual report, every library in the country is supposed to fill it out every year annually. People have different timetables, and I'll talk about what that looks like. But so yeah, who uses the info in the report? What happens to the report after it's done? So ultimately, IMLS uses it to figure out what funding looks like and to make a case for their own funding with the Congress. The federal government uses it to see what's up with libraries, what's going on, what's changes, etc. And then other state and public libraries nationwide use your stats and every other library stats to find somebody who's comparable, so they can figure out what's going on. There might be a library in Idaho who looks at Vermont and says, oh, there's sort of this middle range of Vermont libraries that have experience that seems to be a lot like mine, so I'll look at their stats and compare them to my stats. So this way, because it's shared nationwide, everybody can look everywhere. In the state, who looks at it, our department looks at it and figures out what's changing, how each library looks, etc. And then also state government looks at it to figure out where things are at in terms of our funding, and then just generally how libraries are, what's going on with libraries, I guess. And then locally, your library will look at the stats that you submit, but also can use it to compare to other libraries, other equivalent libraries throughout the state and across the country. And then members of the public may look at these stats to fig's figure out what the situation on the ground with libraries. So the short version is a lot of people in a lot of places use the statistics to do a variety of things, and it's hard to sort of encapsulate that as one thing. Okay, when is the report due? First off, the report is due every year. There are other surveys out there that are not annual, but the Public Library Survey, aka the annual report, is annual. It's in the name, I guess. It's due every year. The opening date for this year is going to be December 1st. It's possible it may open just a little bit early because I think it's almost finalized, and I think we may be good. As soon as it is finalized, I'll just open it up to people so you can start filling it out early if you want to, but I will let you know when that's the case. Otherwise, December 1st is the planned date. The end date for it is going to be January 31st, 2020. Also, I can't believe that I've started writing 2020 as the date on things because it seems like it will always seem like the future. So that's the initial due date, and then anybody who wants can get a 2-week extension to February 14th by just contacting me. You don't need a reason. You just let me know that you're doing it, and that's totally fine. All right, so what time period does it cover? This is, in fact, one of the most confusing aspects of the annual report. And it's confusing because libraries throughout the state, because Vermont is, libraries have sort of developed in a very independent way. There's not the same sort of statewide structures or even countywide structures that happen in a lot of other states. So everybody has their own fiscal year to some degree. There's no real consistency on that front. There are 3 popular fiscal years. So the most popular ones are the calendar year, which is January 1st, December 31st. The what I call the traditional fiscal year, which is July 1st to June 30th of the next year. That's what the state uses for its fiscal year. And then the federal fiscal year is October 1st to September 30th of the next year. And there are a few libraries in the state that use the federal fiscal year. And then there are also other ones, to some degree, whatever people ended up using. In some cases, it's dependent on your municipality. If you're a municipal library, your municipality may have come up with some other fiscal year that they follow. So you're probably using whatever they want you to use. And then there's other libraries that I'm not sure exactly how they ended up using these peculiar ones. But, that's ultimately we don't want you to have to change your fiscal year or tracking or anything like that because of this. We want you to just use whatever you have. But the challenge of that is it makes things a little bit complicated in some cases. So we want you to submit the last fiscal year that you finished by October 15th. And that sounds super confusing, so don't focus on that part. Focus on if you do the traditional fiscal year, July to June, or the federal fiscal year, October to September, you want to do the most recent one. You want to do the one that ended up that finished in June of this year, or the one that ended up in September of this year. So that's basically straightforward. If you use either of those fiscal years, what you do is basically intuitive. However, if you follow the calendar year, January to December, you should submit last year's data, which is 2018's data in this case. And that's because because of the way it's composed, we're starting to accept data in November, and your year's not done yet. And it's also because that's the way it's been done for years at this point. So if you have a calendar year, you should be submitting last year's data, which is super unintuitive and is probably the most confusing thing about the annual report. If you have any questions about anything, I'll get back to that, but if you have any questions about this, you should contact me before you start doing anything, and we'll see if we can figure it out. Occasionally, people aren't able to submit the last year's data, and we have them submit something else, so there are a couple of options. Don't panic, whatever the situation is. Don't panic across the board for the annual report. We can always figure it out. And then basically, if it seems like that doesn't seem straightforward or you have questions about it, just get in touch with me. But in general, January through December fiscal year libraries should be submitting last year's 2018 data. All right, so what's new? The portal is actually not new. The portal was new last year. Our vendor updated the portal to this new model. There were a few growing pains, and there are a couple of little quirks that are still in it, but overall it's a lot easier to read and use, particularly to read the old one. The old one was pretty old, and so it's the new portal. So those of you who submitted last year, it's the same portal. Nothing technically has changed. It looks the same. Those of you who are new to the process, this is roughly what you're going to see, and we'll get a better look at that later. So changes from last year. There are very few changes from last year. What have we changed? We've added 2 new questions. First off, we added a question about staff hours for librarians who have a certificate of public librarianship. And this is anybody who has one of those by the end of the year that you're reporting on. We haven't been tracking that, and since we put effort into making that happen, and more so you guys put effort into getting your certificates, we want to demarcate it. So there's a new question in there about how many your weekly staff hours for people who have the certificate. Questions on that, you can get in touch with us. Second question, non-library sponsored events held in library facilities. So previously, if you had an event, if somebody came into your building and you basically had nothing to do with it, but they were using your space, we weren't tracking that. IMLS is not tracking that. And I think at some point they'll probably change, because as time has gone along, that's become more and more important. You sort of, a meeting space, providing a meeting space is increasingly a core concept of libraries. But so this year we decided we're going to track it. So basically, this number is we're just looking for when people had events in your library and you were not sponsoring it, it was not really involving you, they were just there. We want to know how often that happens. We don't want to know attendance because we think that's going to be too hard to track. The thing is, obviously, we only made this change relatively recently, so you may not have that data, and we know that. So if you have data, put it in. If you don't have data, don't worry about it. This is just sort of a pilot year. Next time around, we'll know to track it the whole year. Remove questions. We tried to prune a number of them, and there was some sort of disagreements on what we should prune, so we actually didn't take off as many as we were going to. But as the years goes along, there's a few other questions we're probably going to pull out. First off, there was a question about the total number of computers, including staff and public computers, that was on the survey. There's a separate question about public computers, and we decided we only care about public computers. We don't actually care how many staff computers you have. I mean, obviously, if you're having a computer problem, we want to know about it, but in general, I don't think that's a thing that people are using very much because it's so dependent on how you're set up. Like, in some cases, a bunch of staff share a computer, in some cases, everybody else. Anyway, so we pulled that question out. Next, there were these series of questions about how old your computers were. Are they 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc.? And we pulled those out because, frankly, I don't know. We're not doing anything with them, and I don't think you were probably doing very much with them. Obviously, if you have a problem, we want to know about it. And if you're concerned your computers are too old, that's a separate question, but we pulled that out of the survey. And then lastly, there were a bunch of yes-no questions about various computer assistance programs that you might have done. Like, did you help people with formal training? Did you do one? And it wasn't a number. It was just, did you do it? Did you not do it? And I don't think it's not a very usable question. So we pulled that out as well. So those are gone. Hopefully, again, next year, we might pull a few more out, or we might update them in ways that are slightly more useful. And then additionally, each year we kind of change the language a little bit. We've been trying to prune it. The language was pretty static for a long time, and there are things that we have hopefully made a little more intuitive and coherent. Okay, so basics of the report. Every library has a specific login username and password that they use to get into the survey, and I'll show you what the survey looks like more closely in a minute. But everyone should have that. I am going to send it out to every library, at least to the best contact information I have for every library in the coming weeks. So if you don't know where it is, you'll be getting it soon. And it's basically just library independent username, password. Doesn't change. It's the same every year. So if you have it from last year or the year before, it's the same information. And that will get you where you need. Then there's also a link, which is just the set link. Everybody has the same link. It's not like Vermont Online Library or anything. So you'll just go to the link, put your information in, boom. Okay. You can work on the report in any order you want. You do not. It's in a specific order, but you don't have to go in that order. You can jump around. You can do whatever works best for you. You can work on a section. You don't need to finish the section as long as you save the page or go to another section. It will save the page, and then you come back to it and do whatever you want. So if there's one question that's giving you trouble, you can just move along. Whatever order you want works fine for us. We'll show this in a second, but there is a button that says Show Last Year's Answers in the upper right-hand corner. I think you should probably have that going pretty much all the time. I think it's really helpful to give you sort of a kind of reality check, because if you put in a answer and it looks dramatically different than last year, then maybe you know why it's dramatically different, and maybe the answer is that last year's data was weird and you put in something weird, but it just gives you a sort of heads up that something is way different. You'll get a heads up a little later, but I find it useful to just have it in there, and it also gives you an idea of what the formatting should look like. For each question, there's also a little question mark next to it. And you can click on that, and that will give you a little bit of our instructions. The instructions are like this big Word document that you can also look at. But if you just want the instructions for a specific question, you can use that. I'm hopeful. I tried to make the questions a little more intuitive this year, so maybe you don't need the instructions as often as you did. Maybe you can just do, but it's still there. And I think I say this about 8 times in this thing, but if you're not sure about anything, ask me. Please don't hesitate. Get in touch with me. This is my job. I want you to get in touch immediately. If you think you have a problem, contact me immediately. Don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like you have to wrestle with it. Don't say. I would really don't want you to call me and say, I've been wrestling with this for 3 hours and I thought I'd call. Don't spend the 3 hours. Just get in touch with me, please, because probably whatever it is, we've dealt with it before, and it's not. It doesn't seem intuitive to you, but we'll know the answer. So if you have any questions at any point about the annual report, please get in touch with me. Okay. Report overview. I'm gonna show you the visual report, but I just wanted to. It has 8 major sections, and then there's a few at the end. And these are what they are. I'm not going to talk through them because we're going to walk through them in 1 second. But those are the major ones. And again, you can do them in whatever order you want. You start off going, with one, but you can jump around or what have you. Okay, so now I'm going to show you. I'm going to switch to showing the actual survey. So let's make sure we can do that. Okay, hopefully it's working on showing the screen. Not yet, working on it. All right, sorry, that's taking, there we go. Okay, so this is the website that everybody is going to go to enter their data. And it is, and I'll send the link out so you don't need to write it down right now. If you don't have it, it's the same link as last year. It is not the same link as 2 years ago. There's a little change, but again, I'll be emailing it to everybody. So what you do is you come to this page and you put your username in, which looks like VT and a bunch of numbers, and then you put in your password, which all of a sudden I was under the gun and totally forgot. But okay, and then you're in. So obviously, if you're only you will only see your data if you once you log in. I'm seeing information for all the libraries, but I'm going to pick the first library on the list, Abbott, and we'll look at their information. Let's see if I can get this to, there we go. Okay, full screen. Okay, so this is what the survey looks like. We're going to hop through the various sections of the survey, but basically every page looks the same. It has the name of your library up here. It has the sort of navigation on the left side. It shows you all the sections and how many pages each section has. Each section, there's a few sections with only 1 page, but most of them have 1, 2, 3, or 4 pages. And then that's all the way down. Okay, and then up here in the top right, there's a bunch of important stuff. But the most important button, I would say, is Show Last Year's Answers. So I think there's no reason to not be showing that at all times. And then up here, there are other buttons. You can hit Save. If you go to another page, it automatically saves it, but like if you're working on a page and then you're just going to get out of it, hit save first. It never hurts to just hit save, I guess, if you have any doubt about whether the page has been saved. Submit is when you're totally done with the survey, and what it will then do is tell you if you need to do anything else or not. It'll gauge that. Printing lets you print the survey, print what you've put into the survey, your data. There's a quirk with it where the PDF printing doesn't, it will not spit out a PDF. It just, so if you ever have problems with printing, just contact me and I can send you your PDF if it doesn't do what you expect to do. And then show status is a thing you'll do at the very end, which we'll talk about in a minute, to make sure that everything has been filled in. Further in the upper right is the FAQ, which is just that. And then instructions. I talked about instructions a little bit earlier. It's a big, long document that is instructions for every single question in the survey. But you can also reach it on a question-by-question basis. Let's see. So, so this is roughly what the survey looks like. It's each question explains what the question is, has your field to finish it, to enter it. It has a little question mark, which leads to instructions. It shows you, if you have it going, last year's answers. Hold on, I'm going to mute a couple. So, you know what? Hold on once. Okay, I just muted a couple folks because we were just getting a little bit of background noise. So I will unmute folks once we are back up and running. Okay, now I want to go to, sorry about that. Okay. And it's got to reload. Oh, come on. It's got to reload the page. Sorry about that. I didn't think about the fact that it will take 20 seconds to get back up. Okay, so that's that. And then there's two things over here on the right. Flag is for you. You flag a question because you want to get back to it later and you want to say, oh, I'm not sure if this is the right answer, or I have a question about it. That's for you. It's not really, it doesn't really do anything on the back end. And then notes have to do with when there's something called edit checks, and we'll talk about edit checks later. But all right, so the first section of the survey is contact information, directory info. So it has contact info about your library, has the current librarian and the chair of the trustees. It has your hours of operation, and I think we can scroll down and look at that. It has your hours of operation, and if you have reduced hours, has your weeks open per year, and then at the next page, it has, and that's a quirk I'm going to tell you about in a second. On the next page, it tells you when your fiscal year starts and ends, and when and how the population of your service area. Oops, hold on. I think we're getting a little more. Yeah. I just had to mute somebody because we're getting a little background sound. Okay, so contact information, a lot of that is already filled in because it doesn't change from year to year. Most libraries didn't move this year, though a few did. Congratulations to those in new places. But most places didn't move, so those are there. If you need to change them, let me know, and that way we can make sure we have your contact info correct. But otherwise, you just fill in everything else that's there. So that is directory info. That one is pretty straightforward. Next question is staffing. Staffing is your weekly hours for various kinds of staff members. And we want to, so basically, and this is in an average week. So if there, for some reason you have big changes, we want to know average week, your normal amount, basically a normal week. So if there was something that happened, that was like out of place, somebody was out on sabbatical or something on a long-term situation, we want like your full normal staffing levels listed here. If you have questions around that, you can ask me. But basically, we ask about weekly hours for librarians with an MLS, librarians with a certificate of public librarianship, and then librarians without an MLS. So we want to know that, and then it adds up your librarian hours. And then other staff is everybody else, basically. Whatever they are doing, we want them listed here. Anyone who is not a librarian on staff. So we get that there. And then there are a couple of smaller questions, which are one, staff hours paid from funds outside the library budget. Often that's like AmeriCorps or some other group that is funding a specific position, so we'd like to know about that. And then last, but certainly not least, is volunteer hours in an average week. That can be people who are shelving, people working the desk, but it's also board members, friends of the library. And if you, and some of those, particularly like Friends of the Library, if you have a book sale, they may have very peaky hours. So they may be periods where they don't do anything and other periods where they do a lot. Ideally, whatever you can do to get an average, if you can get an annual number and then just divide it by 52, that works perfectly. And whatever you can do to get volunteer numbers, that is great. But we, Vermont libraries especially, are super dependent on volunteer hours, and I think this really brings home the support that communities give to their libraries. So that's that. Okay, so that was staffing. That was number 2. Number 3 is space. This one's an easy one. So it's how much the square footage of your building is. And this is another one that you are not typically changing. It's just the same number as last year. Obviously, a few libraries, it can be different. So if your square footage, the size of your library changed, or if it's wrong, and in some cases it probably is, if it's wrong, either way, get in touch with me and we will fix that number and let me know what you think it should be. But that's it for that one. Next, the first of the more involved questions. Operating income. So operating income is almost all money that is coming into the library. So it is first and foremost local tax support. So everyone who is either a municipal library or who receives any money from their municipality should enter that here. And if you get money from multiple municipalities, then you just need to keep adding a new town for each one. So for this, we just need the town and the amount that they give you. So that's that. Next is, okay, so there's a question about non-borrower fees, and that's, and not a ton of libraries charge non-borrower fees, but for some, it's actually a significant portion of their income. So we want you to just put in, if you do that, put that in here and then put your total. Next question is all other local income, which is an enormous number of, I mean, not huge, but it covers a huge number of things. It's basically all donations, all private support, everything the friends do, book sales, anything like that that is coming into your library but did not come through a municipality goes under all other income. So that's there. Next, transfers. Transfers are a little bit confusing. Basically, transfers are money from previous years that ended up in a savings account or an endowment or any other structure like that is controlled by the library or the library board and that got put into your budget this year. For example, if you have an endowment and you take out, whatever, $300 every year in interest and you put it in, that's $300. If you have a savings account and you had a bunch of money from last year that didn't get spent somehow and there's $700 there and you put it into this year's budget, that's a transfer. Transfers can be a little bit confusing. So if you're ever not sure if something is a transfer, you can run through the instructions, but just get in touch with me and we will figure it out. And sometimes we have to dig a little bit to figure out what the answer is. So transfers. Okay. Then we go into grants. Grants have a bunch of different questions affiliated with them because we want you to answer for individual grants. It starts off with the sort of standard state grants, which are here. In each case, we want to know how much money you received. Then we go on to federal grants, USDA facilities grant, the courier system grant because it comes through LSTA, goes here. And then it's more freeform, other federal grants, anything that we didn't ask about, but that you got this year. First off, yay. Secondly, please write it in here, and we would love to have it. And then lastly, all other grants, which is anything that's not a federal grant that is not already listed, you put in here. So ideally, we want all the grants that you received in this year get listed somewhere in here. Not listed twice, only, no matter what kind they are, please only list them in one spot, but figure out what is the most pertinent spot and put them there. Yeah, so that's operating income. Next. Capital revenue. So capital revenue in general only affects a relatively small percentage of libraries in a given year, but capital revenue is for any very large projects that get done. Typically it is for building projects, either expansions, renovations, or new buildings entirely. But it can be for other very large one-time, could be if you bought an ILS, and that is a huge expense for 1 year. It could be that you bought maybe even a server, you re-networked the entire building. Anything that is a one-time expense that you had to do could be a capital expense and capital revenue. Normal like wear and tear, like we busted a window and we fixed it. Things like that are not capital. Don't count as capital revenue. Or typically don't. But if you have any questions about whether something's capital or not, give us a holler. But in general, on an average year, most libraries have zero capital revenue. Okay, operating expenditures. So this is the other half of income. This is where the money is outgoing. Okay, so ideally this is capturing almost all the money that your library is spending. So it's broken into a few categories. The first two are collection expenses. And so that's one of the big ones, and traditionally was a even larger percentage of library expenditures. So that's basically anything you spent for print, electronic resources, or everything else, audio, video, CDs, music, anything else in that vein. And there are a number of questions in the survey where it asks you to break them down into categories, like print, electronic, other. If you cannot break them down into print, if you don't have those separated, if you can't do all of those, then you just do this one, in this case FO4, which is a total. Just give us, if you can't break it down, just give us a total, and that's fine. It'll still work in the survey. Don't put a total and one of the subcategories, because the math will not work out correctly, and I will come and talk to you. And we'll just, not like I'm angry, I'm sorry, that sounded wrong. It's not a going to the principal's office. It just means I'll say, this doesn't look right, and we'll figure it out. But in general, you should always either do all the individual categories that are relevant or the total, and not both. Okay, so first section is collection expenses. The second section is employee expenditures. So employee expenditures are, first off, salaries, and then secondly, benefits. The trick is benefits cover a lot of things. They obviously cover, insurance and things like that, but in some cases, libraries, unfortunately, do not give those to staff members because of the way things are constructed and they're part-time and so on. But this also includes Social Security and Medicare, which no matter who, even if there aren't any benefits affiliated, Social Security and Medicare should be going in here. That can be a complicated conversation to get at that number in some cases, but that's the thing that you really want, and that's supposed to go there. So if you're having trouble with that, give me a holler. If you're a municipal library, you might have to talk to whoever manages finances on the municipal side, or if you're a non-municipal library, you may need to talk to the treasurer of the board. But in any case, we like that one in there. If you're having trouble getting it, give me a holler. There is, let's see, and then if you can't, if you have a total but not individual numbers for those two, you do that here. Okay, so those are the big ones. And then next, much like income, the next one is other operating expenses, which is basically almost everything else. So it covers a huge amount of ground. It is anything that is not collections or staff almost. So building maintenance or repair, debt service, heat, insurance, professional service, everything that goes into making books ready for going out that are not actually literally books. So all the stuff that you need to wrap the books, the stickers, all the other supplies that go into putting books out on the shelves, those all count. Paper products, photocopiers, computers, everything else goes in other operating expenses. So, as I said, it can be a pretty sizable thing. I just realized. Well, I'm going to close this out for now. Okay, and then we get to, so that's most of your money has already been described. Next is money spent on grant projects. So this is everything that you spent on all the grant money that got spent on a project. If there's non-grant money that got spent on a project, it should be in one of the other categories. It should only be, in an ideal world, all the grant money that you put into income, the other end of it should also go into expenditures. Sorry, everything that came into income should also go out as expenditures. In some cases, the money didn't get spent this year, and so that's fine. We know that's how it works, but ideally, that's basically how it goes. And then there is one more question about capital expenditures. So if you happen to have capital expenditures this year, you write them right there. And so they should add to the capital revenue in the previous question. All right, so we're trucking on through. Only two more big sections. And once I get to the end of this, I'm going to hold for questions, I think. Or we'll do questions at the end. We'll see how it's going. So the next big section is holdings. This is items that are items in your collection. So that is basically broken down to a whole bunch of different things. So we want to know, and this is there are some questions that are sort of snapshot questions, like how many did you have? And ideally we want that close to the end of your reporting period. Ideally, we want to know what your holdings were. Like super ideally the last day of reporting, but sort of towards the end is fine because you probably didn't have a grievous change to your holdings. First off, print materials, adult, children. If you can't break it into adult and children, you do total. So this is just how many physical books are sitting in your collection. Next, ebooks. We want you to say which consortiums you're a part of. For example, Listen Up Vermont, aka Overdrive through GMLC, RB Digital through the Department of Libraries, or if you did things individually. We want to just know, because this is mostly kind of a check so I can see what your numbers look like and if they make sense afterwards. So the last one is if you're doing something individually. It's just you were specifically doing Overdrive, not through, or you're doing any one of the other ones. I will note, and I should have said this earlier, for all the electronic questions in holdings, if you use Hoopla or Canopy or one of the other products that are based on a pay-per-use model, which is basically every time you don't buy specific items, every time a patron uses something, you get charged. Those basically don't go into holdings because of the way that IMLS writes it. Those don't count, and that's partially because your Overdrive collection might be, if you're part of the consortium, 6,000 or 7,000 books, but your Hoopla collection might be 90,000 items because you can use all of them, but you haven't spent any money on any of them up front. So those don't get put in holdings. If you ever have a question about that and about whether a certain service is pay-per-use, get in touch with me. But basically, pay-per-use services do not end up anywhere in this holdings category. They do go in the next section, but they don't go in here. Okay, so total number of downloadable ebooks. That's ebooks. That number is available through your Overdrive login, and in some cases you may not use that, so get in touch with me and I will ask you to get in touch with GMLC and they will tell you how to get there. So if you have trouble with that, give me a holler. Okay, so we did physical books, ebooks, physical video items. So this is, again, adult, children, and total if you don't have it. And I have a total error in there because I'm talking about audio items when I meant to be video items. Okay, I'm going to have to fix that question. Let me write down a note. Audio, sorry about that. Audio items. Okay, so it should be video items, basically DVDs or VHS if you still have VHS in your collection. And we have that. Downloadable streaming video items. This is usually 0. IMLS asks this question, but the reality is that most people do not have downloadable video items that are not pay-per-use. So so it's probably 0, but it's possible you have a service where some other service where that's not the case. Okay, and okay, so that did this. Okay, no. So next we are audio items. This is physical audio items, audiobooks or music. Also playaways, LPs, anything that is audio, is an audio thing goes here. And these are physical ones, not downloadable ones. Next, we have downloadable audio items. It's basically it's the equivalent to the ebook question earlier. Do you have, how many audiobooks can your patrons get to? Print serial subscriptions. This is just how many magazines you're subscribed to, magazines and newspapers you're subscribed to. Adult, children, total if you can't get it broken down by category. So that's that. Here, I'm going to do this in case I forget to later. So it says it on the very first page of the survey, but in general, if there's a question that does not apply to you, that you don't do, where the answer is none or not a thing, what you want to put is either 0 if it's a number question or n/a if it's a text question, and that means we don't do that. If there's a question that you don't know, that you don't track, you don't have a number for, and this happens, we want you to put a -1 if it's a number and an NA if it's a text question. -1 is what the computer or the system is we don't know, we don't have this number. Whereas a 0 is none, is nothing. So if, for example, you don't have a wireless number for wireless users, we want you to put in a -1, which means we don't know it, and not a 0, which means nobody used it. It doesn't exist. So, okay, sorry for that. That would have been more coherent in a different spot in this, but I wanted to make sure I didn't forget it. Next, databases. This is how many databases you offer. Most everyone offers all the ones through the department, which is, so you don't have to type those in anymore. We're just asking if there's any other databases you use. This is a spot where things like Hoopla, Canopy count, because we just count the database one. But a bunch of other things, if you offer Consumer Reports, if you offer Ancestry, if you offer Mango, if you offer anything that isn't through the state and is an online database that your patrons can get to, we want you to list it here. And it's just a number. You don't need to describe them. We just want the number. Okay. Okay, that was the end of holdings. So this is the last major question. It is services, and it covers a huge amount of ground. It's just the way it's composed. It's a lot of different things. So, all right. So first off, what does it start off with? Registered borrowers. How many borrowers? Ideally adults and children, but if you don't have it broken down, you can just use a total. How many borrowers you had as of the end of the reporting period? There was a question about what borrowers means in this context. So I'm just going to give the short version, which is, to some degree, it means whatever your policy says it means. It's anyone who has a library card or a library number that entitles them to use your services. And who that is sort of depends on your policy. Do people need a library card to use your computers? That's up to you. Do people need a library card to go to programs? Probably not, but that's, again, up to you. What we want to know is everybody who's in your system as a patron. So this includes people who are residents, and it includes non-residents as well, because they're using your services. It should not include people that you have reciprocal borrowing with, like if you're part of Home Card or One Card or what have you. Those are not your patrons, they're somebody else's patrons. So ideally, and I know that in some cases the math involved in getting them out of your number could be challenging, but ideally we don't want them in your number of borrowers. If you have a question about whether they're your borrower or not, one possible help is, if they lose a book, who's on the hook for it? Are you on the hook for it, or is someone else on the hook for it? If you're on the hook for it, they're your patron. If somebody else is on the hook for it, they're not really your patron. You're just giving them services. So, but if anybody has questions about what borrowers, who to count, get in touch with me. We're going to have a little bit of conversation. We're starting a conversation about what, more broadly, there's a question about who should be your borrowers and how should you track things like online users, ebooks, and so on. But But for now, for the survey, we just want to know that number and whatever your policy is. So registered borrowers. Next, annual visits. This is everybody who has come in the building, no matter why they've come in the building. So many cases, folks have electronic, door, little beam, laser beams, the door count that does that for you, and they just get a number. But if you don't, it's whatever you use to track that. If you're doing a tally every day, then that's fine too. Wherever this number comes from. And there are a number of questions this way. What do you do about estimates? So ideally, if you don't track this all the time, what we want you to do is a little sort of survey period, like pick a week, an indicative week, and count it up. And that's ideally maybe 2 weeks, so you get a couple of parts of the year. But if you need to make an estimate, that's the way to do it. And there's a couple of questions that you can do that by, where you just pick a period, you check that you get a number for that, and then you multiply it because you think it's an indicative period. The important part is picking a period that is normal. So if you pick the height of summer season and you use that number, your number is going to be off. So you probably want to pick, if you're going to pick something in summer season during programming, then you also want to pick something in the dead of winter, and then you average them, and that's getting you to something like that. But ideally, that's how your estimates would work. If you don't have an estimate from that, then you can try and deduce an estimate for your what you think it is. What I find is whenever anybody is using an estimate for what they think it is, and they track it more accurately, the estimate is often very wrong. It turns out that we're like, oh, we think we get X amount of people in a month, and then when they really track it, they're like, we were like 50% off, high or low. So be careful with that. This also brings up the question of, if you're not sure about your data, should I enter it? If there's something, if there's some dubiousness or something, and in general, my answer is, would you use the data to decide something? Do you have enough faith in the data that you would use it to do something? If you would, then that's good enough for me, and we will use that data. If you're like, I'm dubious and I would not make any decisions on this data, then don't. Yes. Okay, we just got a question on whether this will be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be put online, and you can. It'll be on YouTube once it's good, so you can just jump around and do whatever you need to do it. So you don't need to take voluminous notes if you don't want to, and or if you have to jump out to deal with cope with a patron or anything else. Yes, it'll all be there. Also, if I'm talking too fast, that'll maybe help too. Okay. So yeah, so that was what to do if you don't have, if you have incomplete data. Okay, annual visits. We talked about annual visits. Reference transactions. That is a reference question. That is a thing that a lot of places don't track as well as they might. But it's basically a reference question is any question that is more complicated than where's the bathroom, or what do I have on my out on my account. Anything else, where is a book, what's the next book by an author, when does this movie come out, where is the nearest bank. Basically, reference questions cover a huge amount of ground, and in general, for tracking them, you sort of lean on the on thinking that most things are a reference question. So let's see. Okay, so question: if you didn't put in last year's information, can we put it somewhere? Unfortunately, there's not really a good way to get it into the system because all of the data is in a number of places at this point. So there's not really a good way to do it, or at least there's not a good way to do it where we would use it. If you but get in touch. Yeah, this is probably not. But get in touch with me if you would email me. We can talk about it if you thought it was useful for you. Probably the best thing is if you think it's useful for you, I can give you a blank one of these, and you can just write it up, and then you have it for future use. But it will not. Unfortunately, it will not get sent to IMLS, and it will not get put back into other places. So I would mostly focus on the coming year. But get in touch with me if that's a question that you have. Okay, so we talked about reference questions. And I told you that services was way longer than the other categories in many cases. Online circulation. So this is everything that gets downloaded for ebooks or audiobooks, including, in this case, Hoopla, Canopy, and all the pay-per-use ones, because we just want to know they're getting used. If you're having trouble getting that number, it's a number that you may have to go into Overdrive or that you should be getting for RB Digital, but you may have to do some legwork, and I can try to help you if you have questions on it. Okay, so this is a similar seeming question, but not the same. Use of online databases. How many times they get used. So this is all the stuff that we offer, Vermont Online Library, Learning Express, etc., and all the things you might offer, Mango, Ancestry, Consumer Reports, etc. There are some, it's basically how often it's getting used. And it's a hard question because what is used? I just made air quotes, but there's no camera, so that doesn't do anything. What is used, and it's something that we have all been, everybody who does statistics for libraries federally has been struggling with. But in general, it can be kind of restrictive on what that is. So if you have a question about a specific vendor, you have stats and you don't know which one to use, contact me and I can help you with that. You might ask, what's the difference between the last question, which was circulation of downloaded ebooks and use of online databases. Oh, it went to the wrong page. So the short version is that ebook, audiobook, etc., movie gets checked out for a period of time, whereas online databases does not have a period of time affiliated with them. You can just do it and you have it and you can do it again and it doesn't matter. There's no checkout period involved. It doesn't last for a certain amount of time. But if you have questions on that, give me a holler. Okay, physical circ. That's, again, broken into adult and children, and a total if you can't do adult and children. Oh, so this is a question I should have mentioned under holdings. IMLS does not break out either holdings or circulation for young adult collections. They don't. They might at some point, but they haven't done it yet. So in general, our suggestion is you just lump YA under adult because the department, or because IMLS considers everything 14 and up to be adult. So there is more overlap on YA. If it's 12 to 18, depending on what your definition is, there's more overlap on adult than there is on kids. So that's our suggestion for YA stuff. If for some reason you cannot parse that out, it's already included under children's in some way or something, that's fine, wherever it gets put, but that's our general suggestion on that. Okay, physical circulation. This is everything that is checked out. And next, ILLs. So this is everything. So the first question is everything that you are sending out, and the second one that you sent out to another library because they wanted to borrow your book. And the second one is received. It's everything that you have received from a library because one of your patrons wants a book. When items come back, or when you send them back, those don't count. That's in for courier things we want that, but we don't want that for this. We just want to know when you received and when you sent out. And if you're having trouble getting that number, we can help because you should be able to get it from Clover to some degree. So it's everything in and out of state. Everything that you were sending to another library counts as an ILL, ideally. If you're part of Catamount or another consortium that transfers books, and you can get that number, those should count as ILLs. If you can't get that number, it's not the end of the world. But ideally, those would be there. So that's ILLs. Next, programming. Okay, so programming is somewhat straightforward. Basically, first off, it asks you how many programs you had for adults, for children, and for young adults. They break out young adults in this section. If you can't break it out by those, we want a total number. This is everything sponsored by, every program sponsored by the library. Even if you're in another place. If you do a program at a school, that's a program. If you do a program at the community center, that's a program. Boom. If you do story time and you do them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that's 3 programs. Boom, boom, boom. So I want you to count every time they happen. That is what we're going to try to track. Okay, so that's the first part, is the number of programs. The second part is attendance on the programs. So again, this is broken down by adult programs, children's programs, and young adult programs. So attendance, this is not totally intuitive. We want to know how many people attended adult programs. We want to know how many people, any ages, attended children's programs. We want to know how many people, any age, attended young adult programs. We don't care how old the individual people are. We want to know what the program was. So if it's a YA program, but a whole bunch of people of all sorts of ages come, they all go under that. So that's a thing that is can be potentially confusing. What do I do if it's sort of a family all ages program, which you might have? At this point, there is not a way to break that out. So use your best judgment always. If you think it's a kids program that a lot of adults attended, then it's a kids program. But if you think it works better under adult, put it there. I would not stress too much about where the outliers go, things that are kind of in the middle category. Okay, so again, this is attendance for all those things. Lastly, this is a new question, non-library sponsored programs. This is all the programs that happen in your building that you were not involved with. We just want to know how many happen. We don't care attendance because I think that would be a bear to track. We discussed it, but apparently we were like, no, having to go to every Cub Scout meeting afterwards and be like, how many people were there this week every time? Too much. Maybe down the line, but certainly not now. So we just want to know that happened. What is a library-sponsored program? And what is not a library-sponsored program? So in general, I think if you guys your library made effort for a program, like obviously if you put money in, or if your staff are running it, it's a library-sponsored program. But what if it's a program that regularly happens at your library, but you're not that involved in? Well, do you advertise it? Do you put it on your calendar? Do you do things like that? If that's the case, my sense is that you were involved at that point, and I think that you could call it a library-sponsored program. If you're not comfortable with that, don't do that. Whatever works best for your internal tracking. But in general, that's we're looking for things that you had nothing to do with. It's just a program somebody else did. You maybe move the furniture, and that's it. That is a non-library sponsored program. Okay. Outreach services. This is traditionally, it's broken into the categories of bringing items, books or what have you, to individuals' homes, bringing items to child care providers or centers, or bringing them anywhere else. And anywhere else covers anywhere else. Anywhere you're bringing books for people to use. If there's a little free library in town, every time you bring books there, that counts as an outreach. If there is a schools probably should go under other sites and not child care providers and centers. I know but the way it's broken down. Anywhere you're bringing books to anything, please count it here under outreach. If you ever have a question about whether something's outreach or not, then that's let me know and we'll figure it out. Okay, now this is the last category, computer services, but there's a few of them. First off, number of public computers. This counts if you have computers that are staff and public for some reason, those count here. I just want a number. We don't care how old they are anymore. We don't care about staff computers, solely staff computers. It does include if you have laptops that people use or Chromebooks that are behind the desk but get used by the public, those count as public computers. If you have iPads, same deal, that are for use in the building, anything like that, it does not count OPACs. If it's just an OPAC, that doesn't count as a public access computer. I'm fairly certain of that. I've never actually thought about that before, but I'm pretty sure I'm telling you the truth. I will just double check. But I believe OPACs don't count. But in general, public computers that people can do stuff, whatever they want, or to some degree, whatever they want on it, is a public computer. Okay. How many people use these computers? Oh, no, sorry. It's first the training question. So this is a very broad question, and we're talking about changing it, but we didn't get a good feel for what we should change it to. So it's very broad. How many people were trained formally and informally to use on computers? Yes, so use your judgment on that. This includes staff trainings as well. So if you do an in-house staff training, bingo. If somebody wants to know how to do something in Excel and you come over and you help them, that counts. If you have like a formal class, that counts. If you have You spend an hour teaching somebody how to use Overdrive. That counts. So anything can go in this category. And again, we may change it down the line, but for now, that's the way the category is written. Next, how often were the public computers used? So this is every time you have somebody using the public computers. This is sort of dependent on how you track them, but that's just somebody comes and uses it and then leaves and then comes back. That's probably 2 uses, but again, depends on how you track these things. If you have one of those, if you have the software that kind of manages public use computers, that's great. It can probably just give you a number, but otherwise you probably have some way to track it, or you just have a tally system. Whatever it is, that's great. Next, do you offer Wi-Fi? Almost everybody offers Wi-Fi. How many wireless sessions were counted in the year? I'm not going to really dig deep on this. There are a lot of different ways to track this. Some cases it's depending on what software and hardware you have for wireless. It can be very easy. In many cases, it can be somewhat more challenging. So there are a number of options based on what you have and what you're doing. And we know it's potentially challenging, especially for libraries that don't necessarily have an enormous amount of super tech-savvy staff. It can be hard. We know that. And it's just, that's sort of, everybody knows that number is not always getting everybody. But if you have questions about where you're at, you don't know what to do. And some people track it by hand. That's hard to do as well. But if you have questions about it, get in touch with me, and we'll do another. If nothing else, I sent out on the listserv last year a bunch of questions about how people could do it, and I can send the results out again. So let me write that down to myself, Wi-Fi counting. But know that it's hard, and know that you are not alone in whatever number you are getting there. Okay. Questions about, if you offer internet access, do you have content filtering? This is not antivirus filtering. This is content filtering. Is there things that typically adult content? Is there something that's blocking adult content on your computers? If there is, say yes and tell us what's doing it. If there is not, say no. Frequently people who are, but yeah, so you should probably know if you're doing that. If you have an ILS, what is your ILS? We have a separate list that is the whole list of what everybody's using, but it's good to kind of make sure that we're up to date on that. And then last but not least, a newish question, how many visits have you had to your website this year? That's another one that can be hard to track depending on what your product is. And some products, some free products, don't track it in a useful way. We do the best we can. And if you have questions about how to do it on your product, get in touch with me. And again, I'll probably try to have a conversation about this and Wi-Fi, because those are the hardest ones to get in some cases. The electronic ones are often the hardest ones to get the number. Okay, so that's it for the big sections. So next, we are almost done at this point. Okay, so there's a couple questions. What successes have you had this year? We've asked this, and then what's new at your library? And so these are kind of free-form questions where we just want to know what's new, what's up, what have you achieved. For a number of years, this was not getting disseminated publicly. I don't know that it was intentional. I just think it wasn't happening. But we're going to start doing that because I showed last year I made a point of making sure that everybody on staff saw what everybody did, and it was great. It's great information. It's really helpful. It's really non-statistical, but really like important, telling people what's new and what's going on and what are you proud of. And so I want to go back to making sure that this gets disseminated publicly to everybody. So be aware of that. So don't put anything in that you don't want to go out publicly. But I didn't want to do it without warning. So we didn't do it last year, but we are doing it this year. Name of the person who completed the report, title, position, date. Okay. There's just a little bit more. And then certification. I am happy with this. This is all accurate. I think that this is all good. It's the librarian and then a representative of the Board of Trustees, ideally the chairperson. You put your date, you go to the last page, survey completion instructions, tells you what to do, and then you hit submit. At that point, you are on your last steps. So now you go to what's called an edit check. And what? I'm going to jump to a library from last year because nobody submitted this year, so nobody has anything to see. So I apologize to whoever I pick, but let's see. Yeah, we're still sharing that. Okay, so we're just going to do, I'm going to pick somebody else, not Abbott, because I already made them, looked at them. Okay, so Woodbury Community. So at the end of this, you're almost done. You think you have everything in. You click Show Status. Or you click Submit. It's going to take you to the same page. But Show Status will let you see it ahead of time. Okay, Show Status brings you to a page that has these 3 tabs at the top. Edit checks, unanswered questions, and flag questions. We'll go in reverse order because we'll answer the easiest one first. Flag questions are just things that you put a flag next to. They're for your use, and they're like, okay, I want to go back and look at this because I don't feel like I answered this right, or I'm still fuzzy on what it should be. That's that. Okay, unanswered questions. This is anything that the system thinks is required that you did not answer. In many cases, most cases, this means it's a thing that you don't do or that you don't have an answer for, and the system wants you to have an answer for it. So in general, as I said before, if it's something you don't do at all, the answer is usually 0 or NA. If it's something that you don't have the numbers for, the answer is -1 or NA. And that's probably how you would fix unanswered questions. But if you get to something you're like, I shouldn't need to answer that, ask me. And probably I'll just put a -1 in there and then it'll go away. All right, edit checks. Okay, I knew I would break something. I guess it won't show me edit checks because it's the end of the year. Okay, so let's just try it one more time. Show status. Okay, good, great. This is what an edit check is supposed to look like. Every once in a while you'll get that bug, and if you do, you just go out and go back in. Okay, it tells, so edit checks are everything that the system thinks is out of line either from last year's data or that is just an anomalous number. But usually from last year's data. Like if you had a number, how much money, what was your donations last year? 3,000. What are your donations this year? 93,000. The system is going to say, okay, that seems weird. What's the deal? And so what you do when you have an edit check is either first you look at the number and you're like, is that really the number? And double check and make sure, okay, that is really the number. Because if you change the number, not here, you would have to go into the thing. You can change the number to the accurate number if you think there's a problem. But usually you put in the right number the first time, and there's just a reason. So what you do is it will tell you where to put your explanation. Usually it's a federal note, which means that IMLS will see it. And you explain why there's a difference in whatever the situation is. Yes, so it could be anything. It could be, oh, our programming is down because we were understaffed, or we didn't have a children's librarian for 6 months or something like that. Or our expenses are up because we had to replace the boiler. Or all you need is an explanation for it. And in some cases, it will ask you a question and you're like, I don't need to explain that. That makes perfect sense. So put in your best bet for an answer, which sometimes is, that is the accurate number. And you can write that in there. And I will go through and look at them. And I will say, okay, I'm going to put a little more explanation, or that explains it. So once you get all of these resolved, so everything that's an edit check has an answer in it, you will go all the way to the bottom and you will say save, and then you will hit submit again up top, boom, and it will say, okay, for reals, boom, submitted, and you're done. If you get stuck in a submitting, and that happens a lot, don't feel bad at all. It just is the thing. There's always one little hang up. Contact me. I can jump in. I can see what's holding it up, and I'll let you know. And then we can. So don't. Once again, don't wrestle with things for a long time. Just contact me, and don't stress out. The report is long and can be somewhat stressful, but try not to stress about it. Try not to. If you're hitting a problem, roadblock, any kind of thing, get in touch with me first off, and probably just don't do anything until you hear back from me, because it'll be frustrating otherwise. If you can, the timing is such. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint now, and I think, because we've gotten through the most important parts of the survey. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to get to the, what is an edit check? I just explained that. All right, final steps. Okay, talked about that, and then you're done. So, okay, so I'm going to ask for questions in a second because we're almost there. We're in the home stretch. What happens after you submit? Once it's completely done and submitted, you guys certify the form, I make sure everything is good, then you're done. So then I go through and I chase down everybody who is late on submitting or who hasn't done it. I slowly get everybody who is going to submit done, and then once that's done, and the period is over, I through various technical things, I basically pull the data down from the website and then I submit it to the IMLS website. And at that point, it's kind of like annual report for Josh, because at that point I go through and I submit the data, and the IMLS computer or system will say, all right, you have 1,700 errors. And I'll say, okay. And then I slowly dig through them and figure out, usually errors are things like that. There's a negative one, there should be a 0, or something. There should be data, but there isn't, or something like that. And I just dig through it, and then eventually my errors go down and down and down and down, and then it's done. And then I submit it. IMLS comes back and looks through the data and sees whether there's any additional questions, and then it's finalized. Yay! And everybody's happy. And at that point, I can start working on spitting out putting together the spreadsheet that gets put on our website that is the year's data. And then we're done. So that is basically the process. So let's do questions, and if I think of other things that I need to talk about, I will jump in. Okay, there were a couple of folks earlier that I think were on. Sorry, I just want to see if I needed to unmute anybody because they didn't have chat. Looks like everybody has chat. Okay, so all right, Sue said, volunteer question. You said we can count friends book sale volunteers. Is that only if it happens at our building or at another building? Okay, so friends of your friends group should be volunteers, should effectively be considered your volunteers of the library, because everything they're doing is to support the library, probably, unless they're a very extracurricular friends group. So in that case, so in general, everything that they're doing counts for your volunteer numbers. And I know that's hard to get a hold of, having been on sort of involved on the other side of that. It can be hard to get, so you just need to get the best number you can. But it doesn't matter where it is. Whatever they're doing, if they're doing a fundraiser somewhere, if they do a dinner somewhere, if they do anything like that, they count as your volunteers. So yeah, please count them. So yes. Yes, okay, so that's that question. Other questions, please hit me, and if you want to unmute yourself, feel free. That's totally fine at this point. And if you can't unmute yourself, tell me and I'll do it. There is, while I'm talking, okay, so our website has, I'm going to jump to it again for a second. Our website has a page devoted to thank you. Sorry, I'm going to do this, and I will jump right back to your question. Okay, so we are going. I'm just going to show you. There is a annual report page. There's actually a few annual report pages on our website. So that's a place that you can go for questions. So this is. If you search for annual report, you will probably get this. Oh no, I'm still on the wrong page. It's under Services, News and Data, Annual Report for Public Libraries. And this just repeats everything that I said. This will also be where the webinar and this PowerPoint are located. But it has some background information. It also has links to frequently asked questions, which are basically all the questions that came up the last time I did this. And then a few other questions that just occurred to me that we weren't asking. So that. So that's the first thing. And so you may, if you have a question, it may appear here. And then also what to track. And this is basically just a thing that if you're new to it, or if you're not sure you're tracking everything, this has everything that you need from year to year. Sorry. So, okay. So that was that. I just want to mention that is there. There is also a separate page that is where you find the stats after they're all done. And this has them here. So those are both on our website. All right. Sorry. Thank you for people who just submitted questions. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's good. So, okay, first, Emer. Okay. So when you say librarians without MLS, do you mean any paraprofessionals working in the library or staff working in a library position without the MLS? Okay. Librarians, so it's a little bit of an internal decision what constitutes a librarian. But that's, to some degree, that is an internal decision whether an individual staff member is treated as a librarian or not. But that's so. And librarians without MLS is someone who is in a librarian position, a position that your library construes as a librarian, treats as a librarian in terms of their title, but does not have an MLS. So if there's staff who do anything else who you do not treat as a librarian, in many libraries that covers a lot of ground, and don't have an MLS. They might be in charge of circulation depending on your scale. They could be your cataloger. They could be, but you may not treat them technically as a librarian. In many cases, libraries only have a couple people who are considered librarians. Some other libraries have a broader definition. So it's what you think of as librarian, and then the big break is whether they have an MLS, whether they have a certificate, or whether they have none of those. But in general, if you're not sure if you have a specific situation, you're not sure where to put people, what category they should go under, shoot me an email and we can kind of finesse that to make sure we're getting at the one that is significant. Yeah. So when the last library I was at, we had a couple librarians, and then there were a number of folks who were significantly more non-librarians. But yeah, if you have questions about that one, please get to me. Okay, next. Caleb, does the IMLS have any plans to add YA numbers in the future, i.e. should we be tracking those numbers anyway? Okay, so I'll give you a sort of answer, which is I don't know. Last time I looked, so every year there's a conference that all the people who do state data go to, and that's the process for adding questions. Last time I checked, I do not believe there were any. There were suggestions on the list to add YA, which would mean that it would be, if there were, those would be a minimum of a year out. But now, if there aren't, that's a minimum of 2 years out. So I don't think that that's likely that will happen immediately. So I wouldn't worry about tracking it. However, if you want to track it, you should track it. In general, if there's anything that you think you would like, we want you to be able to put your data into this. But if there are other things that you think would be internally useful, you should definitely do them to your heart's content. Let's see. Okay. I don't think that there is. If I did, and so yeah. So Caleb asked if there's an oncoming trend to get in front of. I don't believe there is. If I discover that there is something, I will give people a heads up so they can try to get in front of it. But in general, whenever new questions get added, everybody treats them the first year as a pilot question. So we know that the data isn't going to be is going to be weird because people didn't know they had to be tracking it. Okay, so let's see. Okay. Debbie Roeder asks, our friends group has income that they use for other things, like sending money to Stowe after their flood. Should I only count as other income the money that is spent on our library? That is a good question. Friends group money that goes elsewhere. So I'm sort of thinking aloud because that's a good question. I think some of it may have to do with, it could have to do with how much control the library staff has about the question. I mean, about the money. Basically, if the friends asked the library staff or not. But I think I'm going to follow up on that question. I'm going to say that I do not have the answer to that, but I'm going to see what other folks are doing. But that's a great question, and I think that's not unusual at all. I think people do like sending money to Stowe after their flood, or even things like scholarships that the friends might do. So there can be a number of things that friends might do that are not directly library related, and I'm not going to guess, which I know is probably unusual, but separate entity, just donate money to us for, yeah, okay. My Connecticut, Sue says, in my Connecticut library life, we only count the amount spent for the benefit of the library on the annual report. That seems logical, Sue, and I mean, it may be hard to parse out for people, but that is, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being the answer, because that's what Connecticut is doing. They probably have already resolved it on that end. So let's tentatively say that's the answer, but I'm going to double check that the answer is we want to know when the friends spend money on the library. But I will verify that, so we'll just get that figured out. But Debbie, thank you for asking a question that we need to figure out and need to know the answer for. But yeah, I'll let everybody know once I get more. For non-library sponsored programs, meetings count as programs. Yes, so that's a good question, Debbie. So non-library sponsored programs, say programs, but I keep air quoting things and it doesn't work. I keep that it's anything. People using your space is really what it means. So whether they're 2 people meeting, whether it's 10 people meeting, someone using your space in a way that is not related to you is that. So yes, it's intended to be very broad. So and it's also within the structures of whatever you are doing, whatever your meeting space policy is. So there are libraries that have have like birthdays and things to use the space and maybe have a fee affiliated with it. That counts as a program. Anything that people are using your space should count as a program. So yeah, but thank you. That's another great question. And I think I can hopefully elaborate on that in the question so that people will have an answer ahead of time and don't need to dig in. Sorry. Any other questions that people are feeling like they don't have a handle on? To reiterate, I'm going to be sending out, everybody should be getting, assuming that I have contact information for your library, everybody should be getting an email that will tell you the link that you need to be using, which is the same as last year, and your username and password, which are also the same as last year. And again, our start date is December 1, but it's possible it will go a little bit early. Okay. Debbie asked about summer Bookmobile staff. Should I total their hours and divide by 52 to get a weekly average to add to our regular staff hours? Yes, so absolutely, that is exactly right. So if you have any seasonal staff that are not around all year, or whatever, or that you had something like that, you had somebody for a chunk and then you didn't, please, if possible, add up their annual total, divide by 52, and put them in whatever category they count as. This also works for volunteers. If you have volunteers for summer programming and they don't have volunteers afterwards, try to get their total hours and then divide by 52 to figure out what the average would be and go from there, if that's possible. I know that in some cases it's hard to get that stuff, but do your best, and we appreciate it. Do passes to places count as circulation anywhere? I actually, that's a great point. I don't think that, I do not think that anybody, that IMLS basically is tracking things that don't fall into the the normal categories. They aren't tracking passes, but they also aren't tracking Library of Things stuff as well. There is not, unless I'm missing an obvious place to put that, it doesn't get put somewhere. So that's a good question. At this point, the answer is no, it is not. I mean, your pass circulation is probably not an enormous number, so if it accidentally ended up in somewhere, it would not be the end of the world. But yeah, that might be a question for next year. I don't know if we would we separately track the state parks and historic sites passes, but we don't track the other passes. So that might be I would be interested in asking that question in some fashion if we think it would be useful to folks, even if we just do it statewide. And I suspect that's how we would. So the short answer is right now, no. So ideally, passes don't go anywhere if you can break them out. But thank you for asking it. Okay, Debbie asked, should our summer Bookmobile hours count as hours of operation in the library total hours open? So that's a good question. So there's a separate spot that you can't see, basically, where where any hours for either branches or Bookmobiles go. So ideally, everybody who either has a branch or a Bookmobile would email me their hours annually separately. It's and there's no way for you to see it. It's because of the way the form is set up. It gets put in a different spot that gets submitted to IMLS. Yes, but thank you for mentioning those. There are not a lot of either of those, but there are a few, and we discovered that we've been doing it wrong for a while. So last year, so finally we got that cleared away. But basically, if you have a Bookmobile or you have a branch, I would love it if you would email me the hours that you had for your period, and we will make sure that they are up to date and that they get put in. Yes. Okay. All right. Other questions that folks might have about the report? Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's definitely the possibility. Debbie asks, our town sets aside $7,500 in our capital budget every year towards an eventual Bookmobile replacement. The money comes in but never gets spent. Should I still record that as capital expense? So if for some reason you have money that is coming in but is not being spent, it should be listed as income. Yeah, it's always fuzzy when it's like intended to get parked somewhere. It sounds like, and the plan is basically it's just sitting in a pot, and eventually that pot will get used for replacing your Bookmobile. Yeah, money that is just getting put somewhere that will, and it has no indication that it's going to get used, that is intentionally being put aside somewhere, I would not list it as income or expense, I think, because I'm going to double check that on things that don't have, where they're just getting put into a pot. The trick is if you put it in expense and not in revenue, it just looks like you perpetually are not spending the money. But let me verify in cases where it isn't, the whole thing is intentional. It's not you got budgeted but you never spent it. It's budgeted for a specific way. And in previous years, have you? We'll figure that out. I think I have a handle on it, but okay. Capital revenue. Capital revenue set aside. Yes. Okay. I think Debbie's coming back on one. Our VOL statistics are pretty wonky, sometimes very high and sometimes almost none. Seems inaccurate. Okay, so the VOL statistics, well, so there may be weirdness further. Sorry, so I didn't actually read that totally aloud. Our VOL statistics are pretty wonky, sometimes very high, and sometimes almost none. Seems inaccurate. Any insights on this? So there has been weirdness occasionally on the VOL stats. The other trick is that it's looking for a very specific thing when we do VOL statistics because of the way IMLS asks the question. We're looking for full text articles that are accessed. So, which means a whole bunch of things that people use don't count as stats, which is one of the reasons that the online database usage question is a little bit weird and ends with weird results. So there have been some weird quirks with it, but in general, I think please email me and we can maybe talk about it. But I know they can be weird, and the database stats can be weird. For example, one challenge is because of the way the question is asked, VOL will sometimes have very small usage, but Heritage Quest, because of the way it tracks it, will look like it has exponentially more usage, and I don't think that's always the case. So database usage. That's another one that maybe we can talk about, how to handle and best practices. But I think I'm not surprised to hear that your VOL stats, Vermont Online Library stats, can have been peculiar occasionally. But maybe we can look at yours and see if we can find an idea for why it's going on. So for I will say that for database usage, there was a period, there were a number of years where we were not submitting database usage to IMLS. The folks who were dealing with it here felt like the data was not good enough to pass along. And we recently, I think the data has been improving, though still with some weird things. But we decided, one of the things we discovered is that Library Journal does the STAR program, which is not that big a deal, but they only consider libraries who have completed whatever they've decided are the minimum steps in the IMLS report. And so we've started, that's just annoying enough that we were like, okay, well, we'll submit our data in that case, so it's at least there, and we don't want libraries who are interested to not be able to participate. Anyway, so we know that database usage, there are some questions that have some weirdness, and database usage is one that tends to. What's new in success questions fiscal year specific, or can we include things from this past summer and fall? How is it written? Let me just double check. Yeah, that's a little weird. I think you can put newer things in. You can put more recent things that are not necessarily fiscal year related, because it's informal and it's not. It doesn't go to IMLS. They don't care about it. It's for us, and it's for us disseminating. So I think you can include more recent things. We just want to know what's new, I guess. So I think that's okay, even if it doesn't. People are using slightly different calendars. That's fine. It's just sort of big picture stuff. And if you include something that actually happened like 18 months ago, nobody's coming after you. So. I mean, if you do something awesome, we'd rather hear about it twice than never. So, other questions that people have, things that I did not field or that you are concerned about for the upcoming report. Oh, gotcha. If we always include YA in children's account and now put them with adults, will it look off and trigger an edit check? Okay. Wait, I keep saying that like I'm saying it to myself. Debbie asks if we always include YA numbers in our children's counts for CIRC, and we move them to adults, will it look off and trigger an edit check? Probably. There's a good chance that that would move the numbers enough that they would wonder why you did that. The thing is, you're welcome to include those numbers somewhere else if you want to. You could keep them under children's if you're concerned about moving them over. Our general guidance is that you would put them in under adult rather than young adult, our new general guidance, but you can follow your internal practice if you think if you don't want to change your stats and if that's easier for you. And in general, if you do end up moving them, it would probably trigger an edit check, and your edit check is just that. We used to include YA, now we put a YA under adult. In general, if you get an edit check about you moving the way or changing the way you track it, you just explain what you did, and that's enough. And edit checks are not like bad. We did something bad. Don't feel like it's just here's the thing that the system wants us to explain. And sometimes that makes perfect sense that the system wants to know, and sometimes the system is overly fiddly. Okay, so holdings count for RB Digital is, and actually holdings count for both RB Digital and Listen Up Vermont. I will send out, because I've started on the first of every month. I just do a count, so that it would give you everything that RB Digital, except that won't count Overdrive Advantage or anything that RB Digital has purchased individually. So I think for RB Digital, I can make a report for you to figure out how many items you have, I believe. I think that's where, because I can get the numbers, but people who purchase specific things for their libraries, I don't see them. So I think that I can see them for your library if you have individual holdings for RB Digital. So I think we can check on that. But if nothing else, get in touch with me and I'll make that report happen. You're welcome. Thank you for all the great questions, Debbie and everybody else, Sue and Caleb. Appreciate it. Any other questions that you have right now? All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for coming, and even more so, thank you for doing the annual report, because I know it's a ton of work, and it's a ton of work that that you guys already have an enormous amount on your plate. So I really appreciate that everybody works on it, and that they make time for it, and all the effort that you put in. It is only as good as the data that you put in and the hard work that you put in. So I really, really appreciate it. And again, if you ever have questions, please get in touch with me sooner rather than later, and we will figure it out. And sometimes, as you've just seen, I will not have an answer off the top of my head, but we will figure out what we want to do going forward. And I would much rather talk to you 5 times than have you spend an hour frustrated with this thing. So yes, perfect. Oh, I just thought of 2 things. There is a little bug in whatchamajigger, in the website that you fill in the stats. Occasionally you will click on first thing, you'll get to the first page, you'll fill it out, you'll hit next, and the first page will open again. And it just seems to be a bug, but it does happen sometimes. So just go ahead and hit it again, and you'll get where you need to go. Also, additionally, word on the street is that Microsoft Edge doesn't work great with this. So I like Chrome, but Firefox should work as well. Okay, so I'll put that in the information that we put out later. But thanks again. Thank you, everybody. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Hopefully it will warm up just a little bit. I hope the snow wasn't too bad on everyone. And I will talk to you all soon. Thanks again for everything.